Chapter 3. I woke shortly before nightfall, stretched the stiffness out of my bones, what I wouldn't have given for a bed or hammock, then left the confines of the cave to study the barren land we were journeying through. I didn't get much of a chance to study the countryside whilst we travelled at night. It was only during quiet moments such as these that I could pause and take everything in. We hadn't hit the snowlands yet, but already we'd left most of civilization behind. Humans were few and far between out here, where the ground was rocky and forbidding. Even animals were scarce, though some were strong enough to eke out a living, mostly deer, wolves and bears. We'd been travelling for weeks, maybe a month. I lost track of time after the first handful of nights. Whenever I'd ask Mr. Crepsley how many kilometres were left, he'd smile and say, "We are some way off yet, Darren." My feet cut up badly when we reached the hard ground. Mr. Crepsley applied the sap of herbal plants that he found along the way to my soles, carried me for a few nights while my skin grew back. I healed quicker than a human would, and I've been okay since. I said one night that it was a pity that little people were with us. Or he could have carried me, or we could have flitted. Vampires are able to run at an extra fast speed, a magic kind of running where they slip through space like eels through a net. They call it flitting. He said our slow pace had nothing to do with the little people. "Flitting is not permitted on the way to Vampire Mountain," he explained. "The journey is a way of weeding out the weak from the strong, Darren. Vampires are ruthless in certain aspects. We do not believe in supporting those who are incapable of supporting themselves." "That's not very nice," I observed. "What about somebody who's old or injured?" Mr. Crepsley shrugged. "Either they do not attempt the journey, or they die trying." "That's stupid," I said. "If I could flit, I would. Nobody would know." The vampire sighed. "You still do not understand our ways," he said. "There is no nobility in pulling the wool over someone's eyes. We are proud beings, Darren, who live by exacting codes. From our point of view, it is better to lose one's life than to lose one's pride." Mr. Crepsley often spoke about pride and nobility and being true to oneself. Vampires were a stern lot, he said, who lived as close to nature as they could. Their lives were rarely easy, and that was the way they liked it. "Life is a challenge," he once told me, "and only those who rise to the challenge truly know what it means to live." I'd grown accustomed to the little people who trailed along behind us, silent, aloof, precise. They hunted for their own food during the day while we slept. By the time we woke, they'd eaten and grabbed a few hours' sleep and were ready to go. Their pace never changed. They marched behind us like robots a few meters to the rear. I thought the one with the limp might struggle, but it showed no signs of it. Mr. Crepsley and me fed mostly on deer. Their blood was hot, salty, and good. We had bottles of human blood to keep us going. Vampires need regular doses of human blood to remain healthy, and though they prefer to drink directly from the vein, they can bottle blood and store it. But we drank from them sparingly, saving them in case of an emergency. Mr. Crepsley wouldn't let me light a fire in the open. It might attract attention, but it was allowed in way stations. Way stations were caves or underground caverns where bottles of human blood or coffins were stored. They were resting places where vampires could hole up for a day or two. There weren't many of them. It took about a week to make it from one to the other, and some had been taken over or destroyed by animals since Mr. Crepsley had last come this way. "How come they allow way stations but no shoes or ropes?" "The way stations were introduced after our war with the Vampinese 700 years ago," he said. "We lost many of our clan in the fight, and humans killed even more. Our numbers were dangerously low, Darren. The way stations were set up to make it easier to get to Vampire Mountain. Some vampires object to them and never use them, but most accept them." "How many vampires are there?" I asked. "Between 2,000 and 3,000. Maybe a few hundred more or less," he answered. Whew. I whistled. "That's a lot." 3,000 is nothing. Think about the billions of humans," he snorted. "It's more than I expected," I said. "Once we numbered more than 100,000, Mr. Crepsley said. "And that was long ago, when that was a huge amount, before humans overpopulated the world." "What happened to them?" I asked. "They were killed. he sighed. Humans with stakes, diseases, fights, vampires love to fight. In the centuries before the Vampires broke away and provided us with a real foe, we fought amongst ourselves, many dying in duels. We came close to extinction, Darren, but kept our heads above water just about. How many vampire generals are there? I asked curiously. Between 300 or 400. And vampires? Maybe 250. Or 300. I cannot say for sure. As I was remembering this old conversation, Mr. Crepsley emerged from the cave behind me and watched the sun sinking. It looked the same colour as his cropped orange hair. The vampire was in great form. The nights were growing longer, and the closer to Vampire Mountain we got, the longer they were getting. So he was able to move about more than usual. It is nice to see it go down, Mr. Crepsley said, referring to the sun. I thought it was going to snow earlier, I said. There will be plenty of snow soon, he replied. We could reach the snowdrifts aplenty. In a week. He glanced down at my feet. Will you be able to survive the harsh cold? I've made it this far, haven't I? This has been the easy part, he smiled. Do not worry, you will be fine, but let me know if your feet cut up again. There are rare bushes which grow along the trail, and sap can be used on one's skin. The little people came out of the cave, hoods covering their faces. The one with the limp was carrying a dead fox. Ready? Mr. Crepsley asked me. I nodded and swung my rucksack onto my back. Looking ahead over the rocky terrain, I asked the usual question. Is it much further? Mr. Crepsley smiled, began walking, and said over his shoulder, We are some way off yet, Darren. Muttering darkly, I glanced at the relatively comfortable cave, then faced front and followed the vampire. The little people fell in behind, and after a while, I heard the brittle snapping sounds as they chewed the bones of the fox. 4 nights later, we ran into heavy snow. For a few nights, we travelled over country that was one long, unbroken blanket of freezing white, where nothing lived. But after that, trees, plants, and animals appeared again. My feet felt like 2 blocks of ice as we trudged through the belt of snow, but I gritted my teeth and walked off the effects of the cold. The worst bit was getting up at dusk, having slept with my feet tucked beneath me all day. There was always an hour or 2 after waking when my toes tingled and I thought they'd drop off. Then the blood would circulate and everything would be fine. Until the next night. Sleeping outside was dreadfully uncomfortable. The 2 of us would lie down together in our clothes, which we hadn't changed out of since reaching the snow, and pull rough blankets we'd made from deerskins over our bodies. But even with our shared warmth, it was freezing. Madame Octa had it easy. She slept safe and snug in her cage, only waking to feed every few days. I often wished I could change places with her. If the little people felt the cold, they gave no indication. They didn't bother with blankets, just lay down beneath a bush or against a rock when they wanted to sleep. Almost 3 weeks after we'd stopped at a way station, we came to another. I couldn't wait to sit by the fire, to eat cooked meat again. I was even looking forward to sleeping in a coffin. Anything was better than the cold, hard earth. This way station was a cave set low in a cliff above a forest ring with a large stream. Mr. Crepsley and me aimed directly for it. A strong moon in the clear night sky lit the way, while the little people went off to hunt. The climb only took about 10 minutes. I pushed ahead of Mr. Crepsley as we approached him out of the cave, eager to get the fire started, only for him to lay a hand on my shoulder. Hold, he said softly. What? I snapped. I was irritable after 3 weeks of sleeping rough. I smell blood, he said. Pausing, I sniffed the air, and after a few seconds, I got a whiff too, strong and sickly. Stay close behind me, Mr. Crepsley whispered. Be prepared to run the instant I give the order. I nodded, obediently, then trailed after him as he crept to the opening and slid inside. The cave was dark, especially from the brightness of the moonlit night, and we entered slowly, giving our eyes time to adjust. It was a deep cave, turning off to the left and going back 20 or more meters. 3 coffins had been placed on stands in the middle, but one was lying on the floor, its lid hanging off, and another had been smashed to pieces against the wall to our right. The wall and floor around the shattered coffin were dark with blood. It wasn't fresh, but by its smell, it wasn't more than a couple of nights old. Having checked the rest of the cave to ensure we were alone, Mr. Crepsley edged over to the blood and crouched down to examine it, dipping a finger into the dry pool and tasting it. "Well?" I hissed, as he stood rubbing his finger and thumb together. "It is the blood of a vampire," he said quietly. My insides tightened. I'd been hoping it was the blood of a wild animal. "What do you think?" I started to ask. And there was a sudden rushing behind me. A strong arm wrapped around my middle, a thick hand clutched to my throat, and, as Mr. Crepsley shot forward to help, my attacker grunted triumphantly. "Ha!